What is the protection offered to a corporation, its directors, and its senior managers from a robust and, most importantly, an active drug and alcohol policy? So I'm just going to show you a little picture there of this. Again, was only just last week, June the 27th, I think. And the text that went with it from North Yorkshire Police. They said the van driver who crashed on the A66 was lucky to suffer only minor injuries. That is a pretty flipping convincing crash to me. Whilst being unfit through drink or drugs following a breathalyzer and drug wipe. So that was alcohol and drugs. They also commented in a separate incident, a female driver was arrested after providing a positive test to cocaine, even though she was already pending the result of another drug drive arrest just a few days prior. Moving on to South Yorkshire. They were called to a collision between a van and a 50-year-old cyclist in Sheffield. The cyclist was taken to hospital with serious injuries, while the 26-year-old driver of the van was arrested on 3 counts. Section 5A, drug driving and suspicion of being over the prescribed limit, causing injury by dangerous driving, and actual possession of the cocaine that he'd been taking. Like I say, with society behaving like this, how does a company which hires employees from that society legally protect itself, its directors and senior managers, and also at the same time physically protect the other employees, their customers, and the public at large? And to answer my own question, you need to do your level best. But how are you to quantify whether your level best is good enough, especially if you're in an unfortunate position of being in front of a judge on a corporate manslaughter case? Our very strong advice is to have done and been able to prove that you have done your level best. And my role, I suppose, at D.tec is to advise and support you of that. That's where the years of experience come in. So we can also keep you advised of what's going on in society, how it's changing, what could be seen when you're doing your recruiting, during your induction training, through an employee's eyes, plus post-incident when you need to get to the truth. This truth may be to discipline an employee, but it might also be to prove to your insurer that the drink and drugs were not a contributory factor in a vehicle incident. So first off, we need those who are unfamiliar with the drug scene to trust what we advise is happening. And I think you might pick up from where we source our data from, it's pretty on the ball. And then we can discuss as partners how best to address that and provide a solution to your organization. And that's a solution that works for employees and managers. It's also one that unions buy into and want to help the company protect the vast majority of their members. Another tool that we set up was our D.tec sponsored break road safety video.
How sure are you that your drivers are fit to be on the road? Many police forces are now catching more drug drivers than drink drivers. Drugs, alcohol, and some prescription medications will limit drivers' judgment and reaction times, increasing the chance that they'll be involved in a serious crash. Road crashes have devastating consequences for people who are injured, for families who are bereaved, and for staff and your business. If your driver was drinking alcohol or taking drugs, they could lose their license and face jail time, with much more severe penalties if someone was killed. As their manager, you could be held personally liable and face a jail sentence. Your company faces reputational damage and an unlimited fine. To avoid this, it's vital you have an up-to-date and robust drug and alcohol policy that commits you to carrying out screening tests randomly after a crash and when you recruit new drivers. A simple breath test, saliva sample and skin wipe gives results in minutes and proves you are a responsible manager by making sure your drivers are safe and legal. Find out how to update your drug and alcohol policy to an effective deterrent at dtecinternational.com.
So, how do you in your workplace decide what will be enough to satisfy a judge at a corporate manslaughter case? I I'd like to go to Chris, and in your role as policy lead for the Road Haulage Association, what sort of advice would you give on this?
Well, I think there's what's really clear from our sector is that just to give a brief overview in terms of how the sector's broken down, 85% of our membership is SME and 15% much larger sort of household name haulers, as you'd expect, people like Eddie Stobart, Wincanton. Larger companies have much more robust processes in place and I guess take more seriously drugs and alcohol policies and making sure they're implemented and effectively used. So most of our members have between 1 and 6, 7 vehicles, perhaps. And I'm not suggesting for a second that those are, they're all bandits and they're all doing the wrong thing, but it would certainly be the case that they are less likely, I would suggest, to be doing this as regularly as the much larger companies. There are a few things that jumped out to me as things that we as an industry could perhaps do better, as well as encouraging organisations to implement policies, effective policies, and and see them through. Our industry, as some of you will be aware, the industry, our drivers that have HGV entitlement have to do 35 hours training every 5 years. It's called the driver CPC. So they have to do that in minimum of 7-hour sessions. So they usually do 5 7-hour sessions to qualify for that driver CPC. And forgive my ignorance, I don't actually know how much, or if any, there's any content on drugs and alcohol within that driver CPC training. That strikes me as being a good opportunity, if it's not already included, to having something included mandatory that they could have in there that can teach drivers at source something they have to do already. They have to sit in a classroom, that's already legislated. They can't avoid that training. They have to sit there and do it. And perhaps having a module and a few hours going back to, I think it was Andy said earlier on about having the video after someone's done the offence, learning about the issue afterwards, learning about the impact afterwards when it's too late. Perhaps that's something that we could have in that training to avoid it happening in the first place. In terms of company management, there's the Transport Manager CPC. So this is a higher level qualification that every organisation that runs a hire and reward truck will have. And this is someone who is delegated authority to run the transport operation. And again, I'm pretty sure there isn't anything on drugs and alcohol in that training that takes place. And the final thing I think we could perhaps look at is the undertakings that operators take when they actually have an operator's license, the license that's required to operate trucks within the sector. So they make certain undertakings, and they can be anything from that they will maintain a certain amount of money within their bank to make sure that vehicles are maintained correctly. Whether or not we could look at those undertakings to include something around drugs and alcohol, given that operators' licenses that are enabling people to run trucks up to 44 tonne, it seems logical to perhaps see how we could do that. And they're all things that perhaps we could look at going forward. And I'd be interested to talk to you, Ian, offline about how we might be able to include that. I've worked for RHA for nearly 17 years. I've worked for and been seconded to a number of MPs and a transport minister in that time. And if I'm really honest, I don't see this mentioned a lot. I don't see it come up a lot. It's not something that's popular. It's not something that I've seen come across my desk very often at all. And the statistics, going back to some of Paul's presentation, things like, and this is no disrespect to the police forces or anything, but when you read statistics, when we look at tests per annum, I think last year there were 321,000 tests, and that's half as many as what were being done 10 years ago. There's something just doesn't feel right. I don't know.
Just on, we seem to be pushing this point. We've gone into this. How can we protect ourselves as a corporation, as a company, an entity? Jill, this is your day job.
Yeah. It is, and that's why we partnered with you guys, because we were getting lots of questions from our clients about drug and alcohol. Where do we go? What do we do? And so what we've actually done is a little bit different to some other insurers with yourselves, is we've actually trained up all our motor risk consultants, all our liability risk consultants, and our construction risk consultants to actually use breathalyzers and the drug wipes, and we've provided them to these guys as well. So when they're out and about with clients, we can actually show how simple it is to do the breathalyzers and the drug wipes. And the interest has been really interesting. That, you know, you say the big companies have got it in, a lot have, but we've also found some that haven't, and are still looking at ways of how to introduce it, and are almost, sometimes it's like, what happens though if we find we've got a real problem? What are we going to do? And our whole philosophy is prevention first. And if you can prevent it in the first place and identify and support your employees through this, it is definitely the way to go. We are seeing it's more on the agenda. We did a webinar last week actually, for brokers and for our clients, and we used the same stats you've just used for Essex Police, which were on your website. And the amount of feedback we got from people who said, were those figures actually correct, or did you make it up? And we went, no, we didn't make it up at all. What we've also done is, in our reports that we do for clients, we have sort of key risk management in pieces of information for our clients, and drug and alcohol testing is now on that as a standard point on all our reports that go out to our clients, because we really want to raise this. Because I think, going back also to Nick's point about well-being, I think we're seeing an increase in the fatigue is coming out. We're seeing studies from King's College as well that said 2/3 of people are struggling to sleep during COVID and through lockdown. So what are they going to do once they start being on furloughed and going back to work? There's going to be probably an increase in stimulants. So it's really good to hear Simon saying that they've got all those apps in place. And I think it's for everyone, it's all in our best interest to all work together on this. And I think this is the best thing for me, is what else can we all do together to raise this profile even more?
I think Essex, Mersey, well, it was last year it was Merseyside with their first through 2000. Essex, I'm afraid, snuck ahead, and they were the first to, like, 3 times drink drugs over drink. I've got, a year ago, I had a dozen forces that were doing more drugs than drink. So I'm just shouting that message. In fact, you know, I'm shouting it everywhere, because
it's interesting, Ian, because what we found is, as I think as mentioned earlier, most people aren't actually aware of the different types of drugs. I know when you came to do the training to the risk consultants, a lot of them were like going, what's that drug? Could you explain what that is and what it does and what signs we should be looking for? And I think you're just getting back to that basics for companies to understand what is there, and the information that you guys have just to promote it to people is absolutely essential.
Exactly. The scenario is that there's been a policy there and there's a little bit of a tweak, but it's not worth doing. A little bit of a tweak, not worth doing. 10 years on, and society has changed, we need to say, now's the time that it needs a review, not just a tweak. And that's our day job. We've got that information. We can keep you focused on the key things to consider, and help you through that. In fact, that's going to let me, okay, Simon.
I was just going to add a couple of points on the importance of policy based on 2 sort of newsworthy incidents. Now, the first one's kind of not drug related. It was the famous Glasgow bin lorry incident where the driver killed, I think he had heart failure or something while he was driving the bin lorry, and he killed 6 and injured 15 others. Now, Glasgow Council avoided prosecution because the investigation showed that they had done everything they could have reasonably done to prevent an incident like that happening. So they had the policies, they did to the best of their ability, you know, they implemented those and they monitored them, so it couldn't come back on them. But my interest in this kind of drug driving topic was piqued over Christmas because I saw 2 or 3 incidents reported. One of which was a van driver who I think had crashed into the barrier on the side of the motorway. But another one was a guy who was driving a sewage tanker, 26-ton tanker, which he crashed on the M25 and was found to be way over the limit for both drink and drugs. Now, again, he went to prison, the driver, but again, to my knowledge, the company wasn't prosecuted. So the inference there was that they probably had some kind of drug testing policy and procedure in place. So I think that's two key newsworthy, very big incidents that show the value of the correct policy, keeping it up to date and making sure it's adhered to.